Are you an established small business owner or aspiring entrepreneur? Would you like professional advice to help your business grow and succeed? Well, look no further. The Virgin Islands Small Business Development Center is the territory's #1 resource to move your business forward. Enjoy no-cost advising, low-cost training, and technical assistance from experts in both the public and private sectors. The VISBDC is nationally accredited and sustained by the University of the Virgin Islands and the U.S. Small Business Administration. Visit us at our locations on St. Thomas, St. John, or St. Croix, and follow us on social media at VISBDC. For easy access to all our training and networking events, be sure to join our newsletter and download the VISBDC app. The Virgin Islands Small Business Development Center, here to help your business start, grow, and succeed.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Greetings on behalf of the VISBDC Network. We welcome you to the Connect and Grow Effective Business Communication in a Digital Age webinar. In today's fast-paced, interconnected world, effective communication is more important than ever. Today's insightful webinar will introduce participants to essential strategies for communicating effectively. Whether you're a professional, student, or simply looking to improve your interpersonal skills, this webinar will equip you with the knowledge and tools to become more confident and effective when it comes to writing and speaking. So the precedent has been set that today's lead presenter, Mr. Lanley Shazer, will introduce himself. So he'll go ahead and begin sharing his screen. And in the interim, I'll just give you guys a friendly reminder to place your questions in the chat, and they will be addressed by the presenting team either directly in the chat or later during our question and answer segment. A copy of today's presentation will be attached to the post-survey email sent after this live session. We encourage you to take a few minutes of your time to briefly fill out that survey that lets us know how we are doing. This data is essential to us rendering these deliverables complimentary to you. So without further ado, we can see your screen. Mr. Shazer, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I know people are still coming in. We're going to get this show going. I know we are pressed for time as WAPA announced they're going to start rotating power at noon. So we're going to move quickly, but we're not going to skip any of the key elements. I do ask that everybody put their questions in the chat or hold their questions, and we're going to make sure we have enough time for you to ask, and we can have that conversation at the end of this presentation. This is one that is very, very near and dear to my heart. This is one of the first ones that I gave with the SBDC. So this is kind of a homecoming for me, but there has been a few changes and some elements that we want to add to this content. So I'm excited for this and hope you guys were really thinking about how you can continue to hone and improve your ability to communicate. So many of you know who I am. You've been on several of these. Karen, I saw your message. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. I do a lot of work, wear a lot of hats. And I really enjoy communicating and helping people to become better communicators, because that is at the foundation of our society. That is at the foundation of our business. That is at the foundation of how we improve our interpersonal connections. And so this is one that I am super excited about. I hate that we are pressed for time because there's a lot of technical aspects that I wanted to share with you all. So we're going to go through some of them, but then we're going to really get to what's mostly more content for here in the Virgin Islands, because we do live in an insular community and there are some cultural norms. There are some things here that are a little bit different than many of us who have maybe been stateside or in other countries in professional capacities have experienced. And so we're going to continue to talk more and more about that as we go through this. So we're going to be looking at the power of communication, types of communication, navigating channels, business etiquette, specifically for you all who are either small business owners who are venturing into entrepreneurship, or if you are already in a professional capacity, this will just continue to help you deal with conflict management as well as just everyday communication. I've found that in My capacity now, my day-to-day is at BIT, the Bureau of Information Technology. I do project management, and I have to communicate across multiple teams. I have to communicate across multiple stakeholders, people with differing agendas, with differing priorities. And also there's some cultural differences. In a previous life, when I was in the private sector, I had to communicate globally. So there were cultural differences, there were language barriers, there's also time zone differences. And so all these things have to be taken into consideration when we talk about being able to effectively communicate in the business setting. The place where I want to focus the most on is going to be in this myth busting, because we talked about this when I gave this presentation previously. I have mentioned this across a multitude of other presentations that you all have sat in about some of the things that we hold as being normal, but they are in fact fallacies in our thinking when it comes to how we should be communicating. We'll talk about feedback, and of course, we'll talk about the ever-present idea of code switching and just changing our perception of code switching. When I hear people talk about it, they talk about it in a negative sense with negative connotations that you're not being true to yourself. And in fact, it is a skill that will help propel you into the next leadership position or into the next market. You have to be able to communicate with people in a way that they understand. So we're going to look at that and talk more about the concept of code switching as a superpower rather than a detriment to yourself. So I think we all understand the power of communication. As we already said, this is something that is foundational to how we interact one with another, how businesses interact with each other, how we do on social media as well. That has opened an entirely new spectrum of how we can communicate, how we get our thoughts across, and how our thoughts are interpreted. So that's just as important, and we'll talk about that in a moment, as the ability to communicate is what you communicate, how you communicate. And sometimes not communicating at all is the appropriate response in certain aspects. So we want to make sure that when we talk about the power of communication, it's not just about what you say verbally. It's about those nonverbal cues. It's about not saying anything. It's about the power of silence. It's the power of emotional regulation, being able to take a moment and evaluate a situation before diving into the communication part of it. There are two different types mainly of communication. We know about the nonverbal side, but when we talk about executing communication, you've got two types, written and oral. So we'll go through this rather briefly. Verbal exchange of information or ideas is oral communication. And that exchange could be uh, a presenter to an audience. It could be a conversation, a dialogue between one or more individuals. It could be a brainstorming session where everyone is communicating onto a singular platform or into a singular repository where those things can be divided amongst the team and reevaluated. That those all quantify as oral communications. We also, yeah, again, oral communication is going to be those voice notes that we start getting now. I am not a fan of those. Sorry. But if I'm texting, I don't want a voice note. Just send it to me so I can read it. If we're going to have a phone call and a phone conversation, then let's do that. But the blending of the two, again, that's just me personally, guys. Don't take this to the bank. That's just something that I struggle with. So it's like, let's do one or the other. But those are also forms of oral communication. The benefits of that is going to be immediate feedback, right? When you're having a conversation, you're immediately going to be able to hear a person's tone. You're going to be able to hear not just their words, but the inflection. You're going to be able to hear the emotion that comes out of that. And so you're going to be able to pretty quickly assess how you need to adjust. And that should be going both ways. Both parties or multiple parties should be adjusting how they communicate as the communication develops. This is how you build relationships, building trust, being able to not just present yourself as someone who's knowledgeable, but someone who's willing to listen. We'll talk a lot about that today. Being able to listen is a key component in being able to communicate. And of course, being able to see those nonverbal cues when you're in person, when you're on FaceTime, or when you're on Teams or Zoom, right? Any of these platforms that where you can see someone, you'll be able to see if they're engaged. You'll be able to see if they're interested. You'll be able to see if they are confused. These are all things that you can be proactive in your approach and how you communicate. If you see someone is confused, they may not have the courage to raise their hand and ask the question. But if you can obviously see that there's a bit of bewilderment, maybe they're just puzzled, go ahead and address that because that lets them know that you're paying attention. And that also builds trust. Paying attention builds trust. And that's what communication is ultimately centered around, is building trust, not just the exchange of information. The challenges is there's can always be misinterpretation, right? You don't have a paper trail. And here, if you work in a professional capacity, if you work in government, if you're dealing with customers or vendors, etc., having a paper trail is important. I also work stateside with some organizations and some entertainment entities. And so we talk about our contracts. We talk about the contract between the entertainers. We talk about the contracts between the vendors. We talk about the contracts between the venues. And all those things have to be set in stone and written down. You know, we're in a situation right now where some verbal communication happened that then wasn't adhered to. And so now we're kind of trying to figure out how do we navigate that because it wasn't written down. And so that's one of the challenges. I know I'm not a lawyer, but I know in court sometimes that can be held up as being justified. But we want to make sure that we're keeping a paper trail for your own records, if nothing else. You could be doing everything righteously, everything is on the up and up, but you always want to be able to go back and review and assess where you are and where you're going. Again, this goes back to the forgetfulness and loss of accuracy. I don't know if you've all ever done this, but when I was a child, we had this exercise that showed how communication can change very quickly. And it's one of those exercises where everyone sits at in a circle or in a row, and a person whispers something to someone at the beginning, and by the time it gets to the end, it's something completely different than the original message. It's a fun little exercise. If you've never done this, it's not a bad thing to try and do with your team, just to show them how, making sure that we document so that we're not miscommunicating or misinterpreting information. And it's a great way to do that. It's silly, but it's fun. And of course, here with the aggressive tone that often comes out in even when people are being correct or corrected can also be hurtful. So we want to be mindful of that. And that's some of the challenges sometimes is not understanding how you communicate and how what you say comes off. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit about the understanding and difference between being assertive and being aggressive, and being truthful without being hurtful. We like to conflate those two and blur that line. Oh, I'm just being 100, right? As the kids say, or whatever they say now, but really you're being rude and you're being hateful. And we like to dress that up as just being real or being a straight shooter. But there's a way to present information. There's a way to be factual, and there's a way to be assertive and accurate without being hurtful. So again, we'll talk a little about that later on. I know we're going through this quick, but I definitely want to get to the most important parts of this discussion. So, if you guys have questions about any of this as we're going along, please put them in the chat or just write them down, and we'll make sure we have plenty of time at the end for a full Q&A conversation. Of course, we all know about written, so emails, memos, text, reports, press releases, all forms of written communication. This sometimes is going to be the preferred method based on what you're communicating or how you need to communicate or with whom you need to communicate. Those things make a difference. We'll talk about the correct communication channels in just a second, but when you know what you have to say, who needs to hear it, and the best way to approach them, then you can determine whether or not it needs to be oral or written. We've already talked about the fact that having a written record is important, but not everything has to be a memo or an email either. So those benefits are going to be documentation, clarity. It can be archived. You can have detailed information in it that people can read. Sometimes people won't read that. That's a challenge. But the information does exist in plain form, and people have the ability to go back and review it and research it and use it in a multitude of different ways going forward if they need that information. So the challenge is going to be time consuming to write everything down. I know we have AI, and I do a lot of AI instruction. And I will say this without going too far into that conversation, that it is a great tool. It does give you more efficiency. It does increase the time you have to do other tasks, but also be mindful that it's not going to be 100% accurate. So maybe the time isn't going to be spent writing the entire document, but you'll still need to take some time reviewing the document to make sure that it is accurate and that it says what you ultimately want to convey and what the intent of the document is. So even with AI, there's still some time that it takes to make sure that you've captured whatever information you want to capture is conveyed correctly. You're not going to get immediate feedback often because people have to have time to read and digest that information. So if you're looking for immediate feedback, be mindful that maybe it needs to be written, it needs to be oral, or maybe it needs to be something unique like a form or a survey or something that gives immediate feedback once it's complete. Those types of written communications are also valuable tools that you can add to your toolkit when you're needing feedback on different aspects of your business or different aspects of your department or different aspects of your leadership, your agency, what have you. Of course, there's going to be the unfortunate event that some things are overlooked. We all get tons of emails every day, and it's easy to get something lost in the shuffle and lost in the flurry of information that's coming across our desk all the time. So that's something to be mindful that written communication could just be missed. Someone's not neglecting it. They're not overlooking it. They're not being spiteful. They just may be actually busy and have a lot on their plate, and they might have just overlooked whatever you sent. So, you have to understand that navigating the correct channel is important. And those channels are diverse. So there's lots of different ways. We talked about surveys. We've talked about forums, discussion boards, presentations. We've talked about email, video conferencing. So you can see here that there are a multitude of different ways you can communicate. And what I would say is you have to really take a moment, and I don't know how many people deal with like stakeholder analysis, but when you look at a stakeholder, someone who has an interest or is going to be affected by a decision that you're making, a product that you're using, something that you're bringing to the community or the like, you have to understand as best you can what their interest and investment is so that you can understand the correct way to communicate with them, what that correct channel looks like. If it's for the general public, and let's say it's an aging population, okay, you don't want to be complex. Your channel may be the radio. We still use that here. Your channel may be the newspaper. We still use that here. So you have to do a little bit of research to understand who is the demographic that you are trying to reach. Is it internal? Are these people technical, or are they people who are at entry level? You've got to tailor your message and tailor the approach of the information. So maybe that's an email and a brief memo. Maybe that's a boardroom conversation where you can sit everybody in the room and just simply talk to them about whatever needs to be discussed. So I can't tell you what that looks like. Obviously, if we had examples, we could look at that together, but you really have to do your research about your team, your people, the demographic you serve, your service model, all the things that we've been talking about previously. All that plays into what the channel looks like that you're going to utilize. And it could be a multitude of channels because you're doing several things across a multitude of different people and demographics. So do your research so that your effective communication is exactly that, and people aren't being overwhelmed, and they're not being given information that's not relevant to them, and that they're not being bombarded with stuff that, or blindsided by stuff rather that they didn't see or expect coming. So we talk about communication also being aggressive in terms of open, often, and transparent. We talk about communication building trust. That is how you build that trust. Communicate often, communicate transparently within whatever your policies and guidelines are, right? And then and communicate to everyone. Don't leave people out of the loop, because that's a great way to lose trust. And if you're an entrepreneur or if you're in leadership, once you lose trust, you have a very hard time getting productivity, and you have a hard time getting trust back to believe in your leadership. So that's a little bit different conversation. We talk about how to lead teams and how to lead organizations, but when it comes to communication, you're building trust so that people believe in you, believe in what you say, believe in your vision, and believe in the direction of the organization or the company. So we're moving right into business etiquette. Again, guys, I know I'm moving briefly. Please write down your questions or put them in the chat. We're going to make sure we have time to address them. But we wanted to get through some of that and get into not just this, but the myth busting portion of this presentation. So we talk about etiquette. There's three different definitions here, right? These are the rules or customs that are generally accepted amongst the peer groups. So these are the things that people identify as being acceptable within the parameters of a certain environment. So if you're at the horse race, etiquette's a little different than when you're in the boardroom, a little bit different than when you're at the club, a little bit different than when you're at your child's sporting event. And you can see that based on the situation, based on the location, based on the aggregate congregation of individuals and the types of people that are there, you have to tailor how you move, how you speak, and how you operate. That's the understanding of etiquette, and it's going to be different in every environment. So you have to understand and know what that environment looks like. Dress code is a part of etiquette. Being appropriately dressed is a part of etiquette. And I'll stop right here because I mentioned this previously, but it bears repeating here. We talk about etiquette that when I was at the FBLA induction a few weeks ago, the keynote speaker talked about that in a lot of cases with small businesses and the conversations that she was having, that these particular soft skills, etiquette, manners, effective communication, being able to be dressed appropriately, are the reason why they're having to let a lot of young locals go from their organizations because they don't have a concept of professionalism. They don't have a concept of appropriate dressing and appropriate attire. They don't have a concept of effective communication, manners, and etiquette. So these are things that we can go back through and help upskill our young people and upskill your team so that they can be more productive and they can be more impactful. And so we just talked about those attributes of proper etiquette: professionalism, active listening, responding promptly, controlling the atmosphere. That is, and I'll mention that again, is not matching energy. And conflict resolution is a different part of this conversation. But when things get escalated, you as a leader, you as a business owner, need to have the foresight to see it coming, but also the wherewithal to make sure that you control the atmosphere, that you de-escalate the situation. And hopefully we'll get a chance to have a deep conversation about conflict resolution, conflict management, and emotional regulation. But just know that that's also part of this effective communication concept, is not letting yourself become emotionally compromised when things begin to happen or spiral a little bit outside of what you had expected. And resolution is always be looking for solutions. That's also part of proper etiquette when it comes to being in an environment or communication. It's what is the solution to whatever this is. It may not be a problem, but every communication that you have with every individual, there's some sort of solution, right? Even if you're having generic conversation or general conversation, as you will, there's something that's happening between you and that person, you and your friend. And typically we don't think about it, but there's something that we're trying to address when we're talking to each other. So you don't have to overanalyze it, but be thinking about what's the solution within this conversation, within the context of this discussion that we're trying to obtain. Here's a couple of things to not ever do when it comes to business. Never, ever, ever, never. And this applies to your personal life. This applies to your professional communication. This applies to business communication. This applies to social media. Everywhere across the board. Do not have difficult conversations when everybody is emotionally charged. Don't have those conversations in front of your staff, your customers, your stakeholders. I'll go so far as to say this: if you and your spouse or you and your significant other are in a contentious discussion, that should not be happening in front of your children. Again, a whole other conversation. But the point is that when these things escalate, they permeate throughout the entirety of the environment. And so you need to make sure that you sequester yourselves to either have the conversation, if it must be had in that moment, away from everybody else, or, as I'll point out later on, to not have the conversation just yet until emotions decrease and everyone can think through whatever's happening. We always hear, I didn't mean to say that, I was just angry. Well, guess what? That can never be taken back. That can never be unsaid, and it can never be unheard. And so we have to get better at practicing that pause to make sure that, should I respond? And if I respond, what should I say? If this is a customer service type of conversation, my job as the customer service individual or the person who's supposed to be solving the problem is to solve the problem, not address the emotion. So we have to be mindful of that. Here in the VI, we go from 0 to 100 really fast. And one person goes to 100, and then the next person goes to 100, and the next thing you know, it's full on melee and chaos because no one wanted to appear to be weak. And that's a whole other psychological conversation. It's not about weakness to be able to have the strength to de-escalate a situation. We have to be better about making sure that we are searching for the solutions and not just dealing with a lot of conflict because we like confrontation. Okay, some people do like confrontation. You have to be able to identify and know how to handle those types of individuals. Again, that is a much deeper dive into conflict resolution than we'll have time for today. Matter of fact, a separate subject altogether. But understand that when tensions get high, have a way to manage and mitigate that from becoming spillover into your store, into your business, into your agency, into your office, into your space. Okay. And then this is for staff, and this is something as you as leaders, or if you're an employee, take this to heart. If you are a leader in any kind of capacity, whether it's your small business or otherwise, this is something that we need to start having, especially if you are front facing, public facing, client facing. Stop having personal conversations in front of your customers and stop being on the phone. There's plenty of time in an 8-hour shift or 12-hour shift to use your phone, breaks and all that. We got into that in a previous session. But for the staff members, if what you're doing doesn't require your device needs to be away until you've done whatever your task is, especially if it's client facing. Especially, I can't tell you, I have been in professional buildings, I have been in retail shops, I have been in car lots, anywhere that you go, anywhere, I have been in front of people who are supposed to be assisting customers who are on their phones. And not just on their phones, flipping to social media, having full-blown conversations because they got their little earbuds in or earpieces in, and they're talking about stuff. And I'm like, are you talking to me? I don't even have this in my cart. Oh, no, I'm on the phone. Why are you on the phone and trying to check people out? Pet peeve of mine, but I think it's also rude and inconsiderate and unprofessional. So if you have people who are front facing, who are client facing, you know, if you are offering a service as a government employee to a client, you need to put your phone away until that interaction has ceased, and then you can go about whatever it is you're doing. So that's just something to be mindful of, that makes people feel as though you don't care. It makes them feel as though they are not important. If they have a grievance or if they're struggling with something or if they just have a question, they feel like nothing that pertains to them is relevant to you. And be mindful that people in those front-facing positions, the only reason you have a job is because there is a need to address that is front-facing to the public. So I want to frame that up because that's something that we continue to see, and people are getting fired for that in other sectors, and it's becoming a real issue even if you work in the government. So let's just be mindful that that's something that can easily be addressed and mitigated so that everybody can have a pleasant experience going forward. Some of the things to avoid with communication in general are the biases and stereotypes and exclusive language. You know, in a business setting, it's always we, it's us, you know, because you are a team. We are a team. We are a unit. We represent the organization. We represent the brand. We represent the people or whatever that is. And so anytime that you're speaking, especially if you're in a leadership capacity, it should be we, us. Unless you're taking responsibility for something, then it should be I, because it starts with you, the leader. If you are part of a team, it should be we, us. Unless you're taking responsibility for something, then it should be I. Accountability goes a long way. But we have to make sure that we're not being exclusive, that we're not being condescending, that we're not appearing to be better than anyone else, right? Simply because you do something different than someone doesn't make you better than them. It just makes you better at something else that they're not good at. That is a difference. You know, we see that a lot. People who have an aptitude for something have this air of superiority over someone who's not as good as they are at that particular thing. However, this person is a rock star in another area, right? And so it's apples to oranges. We are all in this together. And especially when you work in business, especially if you are an entrepreneur and you're trying to build a team, you need a team that believes in you. In order for them to believe in you, they have to feel like they are part of the team. We talked about that at length in the last presentation. They have to be part of the team. And so in being part of the team, they have to feel as though that they have a stake not only in the game, but a stake into the communication process. And we have to make sure that we give them space in order to have a very productive conversation. And it's inclusive and not singling people out or making them feel like they don't belong or they don't have any value to the conversation. So let's make sure that as you communicate in leadership or otherwise, that you don't make the mistake of ostracizing individuals. So let's get right into the thing I want to talk to you all about the most, which was myth busting some of these communication norms. And this is some things that we talked about. The first time I gave this presentation, we've talked about this at other areas in leadership and some of these other discussions that we've had. But there are some things that we have to continue to make sure we are not doing. And this takes cognition. We have to make sure that we are not that we are not doing these involuntarily, right? Sometimes we end up in a position where there are uh, things that we have grown up with, those stereotypes and those biases or those ways that we communicate. We have to unlearn some of that. And that I've never seen that more prevalent than here in terms of a communication style that we have accepted as commonplace, but it really has no place in professional communication. So here's some overlooked truths about communication. And that's that it starts with listening. We say communication and we think about dialogue, we think about conversation, we think about oration, and we think about being able to deliver information. The thing that we overlook quite often is that it starts with listening. I need to understand something. Right? I need to make sure that it may not make sense, but that I can capture it and comprehend it so that maybe I can make sense out of it. And we have to make sure that listening is an activity. It is work. Paying attention is work. This is another place where you shouldn't be on your phones. If you're having a conversation and it's an important conversation, or even if it's not an important conversation, it might be important to the other individual, to put your phone down for a second. We are tethered to these devices. And as much as they have a benefit in our lives, they are also to our detriment in a lot of cases. When you're communicating with people, stop and pay attention to what they're saying. The communication should be focused on the solution. Right? Most conversations, as I mentioned earlier, are going to have something that needs to be solved, some sort, and it may not be life altering, it may not be business altering, but maybe even in a casual conversation, you guys are trying to figure something out. Maybe it's something as simple as where are we going to eat? Right? We can use that one all day long. Everybody says, I don't know. But the moment you mention something, they know they don't want to eat there. So this is a simple way to reevaluate how to communicate. If the solution is where we want to eat, well, let's think about what everyone's preferences are and what is the intersection, right? If you look at a Venn diagram, what is the intersection of those preferences? Does something accommodate the majority of those preferences? And instead of everybody being like, I don't know, but I don't want that. Oh no, I don't want that either. Okay, so now we're at an impasse. That's not a solution. That's just throwing stuff out there and hoping something sticks. We have to be more intentional about how we communicate. And this goes to the next point, which is the desired outcome. One of the things that I have learned over time, and I see a lot of leaders doing this, is they don't think about what they want to have happen from the communication before they start talking. If I have to give instructions, then I need to make sure that I know what I want that desired outcome to be. Is it to follow the instructions? Is it to make sure that the information garners focus and empowerment? Or is it to elicit and then solicit information back because I'm not sure if the information I'm giving you is appropriate for the situation, right? I'm not the subject matter expert. So maybe I'm giving you information so that I can get something back and we can all get on the same page. What ends up happening in a lot of cases is that people simply just start talking and they try to figure it out along the way. And this is how a lot of miscommunication happens because neither party has any idea of what they want to see happen. They just start talking. And so again, we talk about being intentional. What is it that you want to have happen? If you're trying to convey information, if you want someone to see your point of view, then you have to make sure that you are delivering that information in such a way that will help them understand where you're coming from. Now, again, there are people who lack empathy, so that may still fall on deaf ears. Again, a different conversation. But when it comes to not just business interaction, but personal interaction, we don't have the luxury of just talking and talking and talking and talking and then be like, oh, what are we talking about? Oh, what are we trying to do? Let's be more intentional about that. And a great place to practice that is going to be in your workplace about the intentionality. So knowing what you want to have happen from a communication or series of communications before you engage will greatly improve the outcome of that communication. And here are some other ones that are just interesting to me, but we've all been there and we've all had to learn how to navigate this as well. So not having the last word is something that a lot of people feel like relinquishes power or control. But this goes back to your desired outcome. Are you trying to control someone? Are you trying to control the narrative? Are you trying to control the outcome? Or are you simply trying to convey the information? You see, sometimes having a last word is simply because you want to make sure that you are looked at the as the final authority, but you still may be incorrect. So you don't have to have the last word, especially if you're unsure of the accuracy of the words that you're going to speak, especially in a business environment or a technical environment. If you don't think that you're correct, then there's nothing else to say. You don't have to have the last word because you think that ends the argument. Something else that we don't have to do. You don't have to give someone a piece of your mind. I know that's a big thing. And I know that that's something I hear all the time. Well, I just want to let them know how I feel. Nah, da, 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 da. Okay. And what did that solve? Again, what's the solution? What was the desired outcome? Right? Did that improve your relationship with that person? Unlikely. Did that improve your relationship in business? Unlikely. Did that do anything but cause more contention and more chaos? Probably. So we have to make sure that you don't have to do that. That's not something that is an ultimate priority, right? Because oftentimes that is an emotional response, which means we're emotionally compromised, which means we're going to say some things that we probably shouldn't. And then we can't take it back. And this erodes trust. This erodes the empowerment of your team to be confident to communicate, right? There's a term called psychological safety, and that refers to giving people a space where they know they can be open and transparent and they can be in opposition if necessary. They can speak concerns and not know they're going to be reprimanded for them, right? They know that this is a place where we can just have this open discussion in open forum, right? When you start blasting people and you start being condescending and you start giving them a piece of your mind, people will retreat. And then you wonder why no one speaks to you. Then you wonder why no one is doing what you need them to do in terms of operability. Then you wonder why you don't get any feedback because you've already proven that you're not someone who can accept that. And I'm ahead of myself, but we're going to get into that in just a second. Something that I see often too in this next point is that you don't have to speak before you're ready. There's a lot of people who are conversation bullies who try to force people to speak to them before that other person is ready. If you're not ready to give a response, and this is not to shirk accountability in responding, okay? This is about emotional regulation. If you're not ready to give a response, or if the response that you know you're going to give is coming from the wrong place, you're not obligated to respond yet. If you know somebody said something that pissed you off, you don't have to have that right. You don't have to give them peace in your mind. You don't have to respond. Oh, you're going to talk to me right now? No, I'm not. I'm not going to talk to you until I'm ready to talk to you in a manner that is respectful to you and to me, and also make sure that I can communicate effectively whatever's on my mind. So don't let people bully you, and don't let people take conversations hostage and force you to have conversations that you're not ready for or uncomfortable with. I'll always put that out there. Make sure that you have a right as a person to say, you know what, right now, I can't talk about this. You have a right to do that. Now, again, I want to reiterate that this is not saying you're never going to talk about it. And this is not a deflection or being dismissive. This is simply saying that we're going to have this conversation when I can have this conversation in a professional and calm manner. Which brings me to the next point. Don't match energy. Never, never match energy. If someone is escalating and you escalate, well, guess what? Nothing's going to get happen but a screaming and shouting match, and all kind of other obscenities are going to happen. And again, if this happens and your coworkers or your team or your customers or anybody else outside of the two people communicating or the group that's communicating, if that's overheard, that changes the perspective of you, of your organization, of your brand, of your team. Don't match energy. Your job is to de-escalate. That is your obligation. De-escalate so that everyone can have a conversation that is productive and solution-based. And this is about the last point, being assertive and not aggressive, right? Assertive is simply saying, I'm going to stay resolute in my position without trying to force my opinion on you. Right? Aggression seeks to assimilate and to coerce and to be condescending, right? To make someone be diminutive and to shrink them. That's not what we want. We just want to know that, listen, this is my position. This is why I feel this way. And although I can respect where you are, I'm not going to change my position on that. Let it be on record, right? We use that this is my position, this is my opposition on these things. It's not being aggressive and trying to force your authority on someone else. And that's the thing a lot of leaders do. Well, I'm the boss, you're going to do it anyway. But I don't have to do that. It may cost you your employment. We're not going to get into all that, but there's a way to navigate people who try to put you under their thumb without being adversarial. A whole other conversation. But just know that you being assertive is not being aggressive. Your tone is going to matter greatly in that. Your word choice is going to matter greatly in that. I encourage everyone, and this is going to sound silly, get into a dictionary. We got phones, right? Use a dictionary, use a thesaurus. Make sure that you have captured as accurately as possible the things that you want to convey so that there is no misunderstanding. So we've got some sociocultural norms here in the territory, specifically, that we're going to look into. If you took this before, you heard some of these before, you've heard me talk about these in a myriad of other presentations, but these things continue to hold true, and we continue to need to address them and figure out ways to normalize more professional attitudes and more professional behavior across the territory in professional capacities. Island time does not apply to work. That was one of the things that was talked about at the FBLA induction. People showing up late and thinking that that's just okay. This is just, oh, I'll be there when I get there. That's not really how this works. That it sends the wrong message to your organization. It sends the wrong message to your customers. It sends the wrong message to your team. So punctuality is important. It shows respect for your position, for your company, for yourself. Right? If you didn't come to actually work, don't come to work. This may sound rude, but it blows my mind the amount of people that I encounter who believe that just showing up is all they have to do. You don't have to do your task. You don't have to do your reports. You don't have to assist your customers, your clients. You just have to be there. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. You're employed because there are things that accompany your role that must be done. So if you don't want to do those things, go find something else to do. And if you have an attitude about helping people and that's your job, go find something else to do. As a leader, those are people that you need to have real conversations with because, again, this affects your brand. It affects your service model. It affects your relationships with other businesses, with other opportunities, people will talk about their interactions with you and your organization. And if it's unfavorable, that's going to continue to be the consensus. And what ends up happening is you start to lose opportunities before you realize that you even had them. People were already considering you before they started hearing about how bad the customer service is, how everybody's sucking their teeth and got an attitude, how everybody's on their phones all the time, not paying attention. You start to lose out on collaborations and partnerships that people were just watching to see if they wanted to work with you, and now they know they don't. So let's bear in mind that all that stuff matters in the full scope of how we operate day to day. And your break needs to be away, right? If you're taking a break, and this specifically applies to those people who are service industry, retail, client facing, front facing. If you're taking a break, you need to be away from the clients, unless you're shopping or something, right? I mean, if you're also being a patron, that's a different thing. But if you're just meandering around, talking out on your phone, you still have your uniform on, people don't know that you're not on the clock, that's unprofessional. I've seen that where it's like, oh, I'm on break right now. Well, why are you just standing around here with your uniform on? Like, go be on break. If you're not going to deal with people, you don't need to be in here where all the people are. So something to be mindful of for those who are in leadership capacities. Like, let's start setting a new standard for the expectations that we have for those that are going to be our direct reports. And so for those business owners, right? If you are going into your entrepreneurship venture, or maybe you are in small business now and you're trying to build capacity and you're trying to expand, there's got to be some consistency about your hours of operations, about the availability of your team and yourself, right? And you've got to make sure that you are delivering a high quality service model, product model, whatever that is that you're in, whatever sector that you're operating in. You can't be all over the place. People can't find you. If people can't reach you, if people can't connect with you, people are not going to deal with you. And this goes to being responsive. If I send an email, or if I have a complaint, or if I have a need that needs to be addressed, and it takes you 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, 6 months, it'll be the only time you ever hear from me. And there's a lot of people who are like that. And we're getting to a point now because there's such uh, an instant reward factor with social media, with online shopping, with all these different avenues that, you are competing against a machine, in some cases, quite literally, that will do it faster without an attitude, that'll take care of the response and all those things. Response time is very quick. So, if you're trying to still bring a level of personality and intimacy and being personal with your clients and your customers, then you've got to make sure that you're timely with your responses, that you are addressing concerns, that you're meeting needs, and that you are solving issues. We talked about being aggressive with your communication in terms of communicating often and being transparent. Make information available. Simple things like your operating hours, simple things like if you're going to be closed. I can't, there's been several times here recently where an agency's like, oh, we're closed today. uh you weren't going to say anything to anybody. You're going to put a handwritten note on the door. Like, we're in an age of technology. You couldn't send an email out. You couldn't send a notification out. You couldn't alert your customers, your clients, or whomever. Come on, we got to be better than that. So make sure that you communicate often and that you communicate important information. If there's going to be things that are going to impact your service or impact your operations, that's information that should be put out to the public or to whomever it affects. And then something else that we've got to get really, really serious about here in the territory is privacy and confidentiality. I think that goes without saying. People's personal lives, personal records, information is all over social media, and these are coming from places where by law they're supposed to be keeping that information confidential. So I'm not going to harp on that too much, but it should never be public information if it's not supposed to be public information. All right. So we're talking about feedback being important, and you just want to make sure that you are getting the feedback that you need, and that you are, using feedback to become a much better person. I'm going to skip past, we got 8 minutes left, guys. I want to skip past all this technical stuff about the different registers um, of language. And you guys can look at this later on. And I just want to make sure that we get to a chance to look at any kind of questions or comments that you have had. I've been seeing some things pop up here. So I'm going to leave you with your final thought is that the way we communicate with others and with ourselves ultimately determines the quality of our lives, and that communication works for those who work at it. With that being said, if there are any questions, Miss Industrious, we've got 8 minutes to take as many of those as we can.
Alrighty, thank you for that. So we've just had comments as you pass. Anyone have a question? You can go ahead and raise your hand and we can let you unmute your mic and ask directly if the need be. Okay, well, I guess as I give persons a chance, I can just safely go ahead and take everyone to the SBDC training portal so they can see how to access this webinar when it becomes in a pre-recorded format. So you'll go to our training portal, you'll make sure you pay attention to the type, and then you'll select on demand. And then every event that we've had in the past since the beginning of this fiscal year is accessible to you. You go ahead and you register, you receive the link and the passcode, and you can watch at your convenience. And so just to mention a few events that we have coming up that we want persons to pay attention to, our Agriculture Business Center. They cater to farmers and fishers. They're beginning to have an introduction to Excel and financial ratios system training. It's a two-part training. It's going to be on December 2nd and 3rd. And then we have Darrell Edwards, VISBDC advisor, and he is going to be speaking to Blueprint for Success, a practical guide to writing a business plan. And that will be on December 12th at 11 a.m. So let me go back here to the chat and see if we have anything.
Okay, and while you do that, I'm going to reshare and put my contact information back up on the screen. So I am available for trainings for your teams, for your agencies, individual trainings, what have you. Let me put this back up here, guys, so you can feel free to reach out to me at any point, and we can have a discovery call and discuss what your needs are and what kind of training I can offer and support you with. I see we do have a hand up.
Hello, good day. Wonderful presentation. But at the pace you were delivering your making the presentation, I believe the sections on the register,
Mhm.
you may have time to go through it quickly for us.
Sure.
And
Let me pull that up.
I didn't see your quote
Okay.
clearly. Thanks.
So, yes, not a problem. So there's 5 language registers: static, formal, consultative, casual, and intimate. And they, the rule of thumb is that you can move from one to the other, but not skip over. So if you're going from, let's say, from formal to casual, that's typically considered offensive because it shows a lack of understanding of the environment. It also shows a lack of understanding of the conversation that's happening. And also in a lot of older cultures, there's a lack of respect. So I'll try to briefly give you some information on that. So the static is going to be what's called frozen. So the Pledge of Allegiance, the Lord's Prayer, the Constitution, like those things are static. They don't ever change. Formal is going to be a speech. It's one-way communication. That's delivery of information. Consultative is a dialogue, and that is something that is between, superior and direct report, doctors and patients, clients and lawyers. So that's just where two people engage in a mutually accepted structure of communication. Casual, that's just the everyday language, right? Colloquialisms, slang and the like that we use, when we are part of a group that allows that type of conversation to happen. And then the intimate is very private. That's close family, that's your spouse, that's your significant other, individuals who, you're having very, very different types of conversations with. That's the intimate register. So again, that was brief, but those are the 5 registers of communication, and kind of helps you categorize what type of communication is occurring in an environment and how best to step into that environment and communicate effectively. And then I will bring that final thought back up, Tony Robbins and John Powell. Again, the way we communicate with others and with ourselves ultimately determines the quality of our lives. and communication works for those who work at it. This is not anything that we're born with. This is not something that we just can wake up one day and do. This takes work. It takes learning. It takes these types of environments, these types of webinars. It takes going and doing the other classes. I still, as much as I teach this, I still, every time I see a new class on communication and leadership and business come out, I go and I take it so I can bring that information back to you all. And I can learn more that will help me continue to evolve as a communicator and as a leader. So you never stop learning this information. And there's always new ways to think about communication. Social media and technology has really opened the door and expanded on the reach that our communication has. And so we have to be even more mindful now that what we say both never goes away, and it is important. And it's going to affect someone somewhere. So we have to be careful about the words that we use, the way that we construct those words, and the way that we convey that information.
All
Do you have
righty.
any other questions?
No more questions. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. It's always a pleasure collaborating with you on initiatives like this. So I just want to give everyone a friendly reminder that the VI SBDC has so much more in store for the US VI small business community. You can visit our website at www.visbdc.org. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and subscribe to the VI SBDC YouTube channel for new uploads of our webinars. We encourage you to download the VI SBDC app on your mobile device from the appropriate app store. And so with that being said, we wish everyone a productive afternoon, and look out for that email that will have a PDF version of today's presentation attached. Thank you, everyone, and take care.
Have a great time. Thank you.